You're listening to the Blind Tiger Record Club podcast, where we champion music of all genres, and we believe vinyl is king.
For a dying man, I feel pretty good, I feel pretty good. For a righteous man, I'll do what I should, do what I should. For a fallen man, I'll get up again, I'll get up again. For a dying man, I feel pretty good. Oh, we're born to trouble as the sparks fly high, born to trouble as the sparks fly. It's alright, in the light, I see you glowing, it's alright, in the light, I see you glowing.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Blind Tiger Record Club on air, sponsored by World Vision. I'm David Williams, and as always, I'm here with the show's co-host, Rudy Newman.
Hey, everybody.
If you are listening to us on air for the first time, then welcome. On tonight's show, we are going to be discussing the Blind Tiger Record Club's October Records of the Month. All the music we discuss is on vinyl, which is all we carry at the Blind Tiger Record Club, so all the albums we discuss on the show have been released in the last 30 to 60 days on vinyl. The show is really designed to be a discovery platform for newly released vinyl, but even if you do not listen to vinyl, maybe you don't own a turntable, this show is still a great way just to hear about new music and sometimes rediscover classics that you may have forgotten about. This is the same format we use on the B.T.R.C podcast. We also have a segment that we call the LP interview, and we just launched a great interview with Thad Cockrell discussing his recent release, If In Case You Feel the Same.
Great record.
And that was the Blind Tiger Record Club Singer-Songwriter Record of the Month in August. And it's not only a great album, but Thad was an outstanding guest. We talked about how he got into music, came to Nashville, his early albums and releases as Leagues, I should say. Dropped the.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do.
So, I think I set you up before we started recording.
Well, we also, took a deep dive on his new album as well. If you don't know Thad's music, this interview is really a great way to get to know him. So check it out. It's available at all podcast platforms from Apple to Spotify. You can also stream it directly at blindtigerrecordclub.com. So just click on the podcast link there at the top of the page, and you'll see all the shows, from season 3. They're just listed out. It's really easy to follow.
Yeah.
So today we are discussing all 4 styles represented in the Blind Tiger Record Club's October Records of the Month program. The first style is a singer-songwriter album. This month it's Dawes' new release, Good Luck With Whatever. The second style is a rock alternative record. It is What Is There by Delta Spirit.
It's a good one.
Our third style is the Jazz Soul Blues album. It's the new release by the War and Treaty. Now, that one does have a the.
That does have a the. It's not just War and Treaty.
Right. So it's the new release by the War and Treaty titled Heartstown.
Amazing record.
The fourth and final style is classic rock, and this month it's David Bowie's classic, Young Americans.
Ooh!
Well, all right, Rudy, let's get to the show. Let's drop the needle and take a quick listen to the Blind Tiger Record Club's October Records of the Month.
Mic strapped to his face, talked about which habits to surrender and which habits to embrace.
On October 2nd, Dawes released their 7th studio album. It was the band's first on Rounder Records. We had the band's last album, Passwords, in our Record of the Month program back in 2008. So this is one of the few bands. Did I say
You did.
2018.
It was a long time ago.
Blind
you guys
Tiger's
might
been
have
around.
followed us.
You may not have been here.
And we got the album 10 years before they released it.
That's right.
It was pretty cool.
No, in 2018. And so, this is really one of the few bands that has had a repeat appearance in our program.
Yes.
Dawes.
Wow, I just realized that too.
Yeah. Dawes is considered by many to be a modern example kind of the lineage of the sounds of Laurel Canyon.
Yes.
And artists like Neil Young,
Yes.
Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Yep. Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
Jackson Brown.
Originally, however, they were a band named Simon Dawes, which was much more like an indie rock alternative band.
Yeah.
And just as a point of connection, one of the members of Simon Dawes was Blake Mills, who we talked about playing guitar on Thad Cockrell's new album. He was also the producer of Alabama Shakes, Grammy-winning Sound and Color. And he was a founding member of Simon Dawes. And when he left the band in 2007, the remaining members, brothers Taylor and Griffin Goldsmith and bassist Wiley Gelber, they formed Dawes.
Yep. That's how it happened, man.
So,
yeah, I guess Taylor and Griffin went to high school with Blake Mills in
Yeah.
California.
I think Blake's come up on like 2 or 3 of the last shows we've done just because he's been attached to different projects.
Production credits.
Yeah, is a phenomenal guitar player.
Multi-instrumentalist. Yeah.
So that kind of closes that circle there because it's just another connection point between a lot of these artists that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But, Dawes released their first project in 2009 on ATO Records, and through the years, they've worked with several great producers. Jonathan Wilson, who has produced artists like Father John Misty. He worked some with Conor Oberst.
Yep.
He's produced 3 of Dawes' albums to date.
I think he's probably one of the most kind of maybe when writing with or when producing Dawes, really helping them realize the Laurel Canyon sound, because Jonathan Wilson kind of seemed like he comes from that area.
Yeah, and he was on those first few
he was on
few
those
albums,
records.
so
and I just looking at his other credits. I saw that guy is definitely he's a Laurel Canyon architect of sound, I think.
Yeah. Well, they've also worked with legendary Grammy award-winning Nashville producer Jakir King, who has worked with artists that range, tons of artists, but they range from Tom Waits to Kings of Leon. Kings of Leon, some of his big ones, he's won Grammys off of some of the albums he's done with them.
Yep.
They did record one album with singer-songwriter David Rawlings, who has worked with Gillian Welch and Old Crow Medicine Show. He's got a studio over in East Nashville. They also did an album with former bandmate Blake Mills, who we were just talking about.
Yes.
And now for their 2020 release, Good Luck with Whatever, the band has teamed up with the current King of Nashville, Dave Cobb.
Yeah, I was about to build that up, but Dave got to it too quick.
So on this new album, we have the California natives recording here in Nashville at RCA Studio A.
You're going to get some magic.
The band's first 2 albums were on ATO, but the next 4 releases were all self-released. And all of the self-released albums have charted top 10 or higher on Billboard's Top Rock Albums and Americana Folk Albums charts.
Yeah.
So at the time of this recording, the album was just releasing, so I assume that Good Luck will...
It's going to end up somewhere.
Yeah, it's Good Luck with Whatever is going to perform just as well as these previous releases, if not better, now that they actually have a radio track charting, and they're now on Rounder. So,
top 20 or top 10, somewhere in there.
Yeah, somewhere. With Cobb on board, this album is polished. It sounds sonically amazing. The vocals, as always, are produced great.
Yes. Always out at the front of a Dave Cobb produced album. You hear the vocal so clear.
At the end of the day, though, it's still a Dawes album, which in some ways I think speaks volumes about the band, since they are so in control of their sound that even going with Cobb, the band's core sound is still ever present. That being said, although this isn't radically something new, the subtle changes, the textures that he kind of puts in, they really did make it feel like it was new for me.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's not like as much of a heavier rock sound. It's a little more chilled out to me, from the get-go. But it still sounds like a Dave Cobb produced record, and it still sounds like a Dawes album, both independently.
Yeah, let's just say there's these subtle sonic adjustments that Cobb made, and it's really what kept me interested. Their tones are really crisp. There's bluesy guitar sounds that I don't think you would normally hear on a Dawes record, and for me, it did elevate the album a bit for me. There are songs like "Still Feel Like a Kid" that almost have this John Fogerty vibe.
Yeah, the album intro song.
Yeah, and I can hear the impact of Cobb's production on that one very clearly, because that's one of the ones where the guitar tone just doesn't sound like something you've heard on another Dawes record.
Yeah. And then that background kind of gang vocal in the chorus, the ba ba ba. I don't know, that's another Dave Cobb thing for me, where it's like I can hear those vocals because I feel like of the way that he treats, vocals in a mix.
Yeah. And I mean, the track definitely seems more open. There's just more space, like if you listen to some of Dawes' earlier albums, they're pretty full sonically.
Yeah.
And
lots of dubs,
with
lots of
this,
guitars, keyboards.
Yeah, so I mean, even if you listen to the last album, in Passwords, you're going to hear songs with keys and other effects like filling up a lot of the space.
Yeah.
But
That's
with
MO.
Cobb now, there's a lot more space here on these songs. It's a lot more open. I think a great example of this is a song called St. Augustine at Night.
The cherry gum would cover up the cigarettes we smoked. The 7-Up would balance out the beer. Mom would make us dinner and we'd all try not to choke. Dad was working later every year. We'd count the trucks on Highway 1 on their way to Jacksonville, wondering where they headed on from there.
Taylor Goldsmith is an accomplished guitar player. He really, really is, both in the band as well as out. He's also...
And his playing style is just really crisp and clean.
Yeah.
I noticed through watching a lot of videos, like even playing acoustic, he just gets a great tone out of that thing. It's awesome.
Well, he's also a fairly established composer outside of Dawes.
Yeah.
He's performed on albums with artists like Jackson Browne, John Fogerty. He's written with and for artists like Robert Ellis, Brandon Flowers, and The Killers.
And even for like TV. Like he's got sync stuff on TV too.
The Counting Crows. And then his wife is Mandy Moore.
Yep.
He wrote a lot of songs on her most
on
recent
her new album. Yeah.
He's also been part of a few side projects. In 2011, he joined Matt Vasquez of Delta Spirit, which is a band that we'll be talking about next.
You're going to hear something.
And John McCauley of Deer Tick
another great band.
To form the band Middle Brother. So they released one album, and that was in 2011. And then in 2014, he was asked by producer T-Bone Burnett to join a project called the New Basement Tapes.
That's right.
And I remember when that first came out, it was a lot of, if you were into music, you were probably following this story because the album, was obviously based off of the Bob Dylan basement tapes that he did with the band.
Correct.
But they were also based on lyrics that they were like
unfinished.
They were
kind
new
of
discovered, but lyrics that had never had songs written with them. So they got together, and it was all stuff that Bob Dylan had written during that same time period between 67 and 75 for the original basement tapes.
And I think Taylor got like a songwriting credit out of that too, like for one of those songs.
Oh no, he because they're writing all the.
They're technically
basing it
writing
on the lyrics,
Okay,
and I don't even know how complete they were.
I guess that's kind of like how Rustin Kelly did with the Johnny Cash stuff. Like
this project's really cool. I mean, it's a very ambitious project. Obviously, T-Bone Burnett was at the helm, but the project itself included Marcus Mumford of Mumford & Sons. It had Jim James of My Morning Jacket. Rhiannon Giddens, who at the time was part of the Carolina Chocolate Drops. But now is a really established, Americana folk singer-songwriter.
Awards every year.
It also had Elvis Costello. Goldsmith co-wrote 6 songs on that project and performed all over it. He played bass, organ, guitar, piano, and of course, he sang. So he was a big part of that record.
Yeah, a small contribution.
Yeah. One of the things I keep seeing in reviews on this album is just this constant comparison to Jackson Browne.
Yeah.
I even read in Uncut, they said that some of the album reminded them of John Cougar Mellencamp before he dropped Cougar. And I think they meant that as like a disparaging comment, but I think it's part of what really interests me about this album.
Yeah, and what's like cool about Dawes. I mean, Taylor Goldsmith, like to me, when you're listening to like St. Augustine at Night, like that's the one track that really stood out to me more than anything, just because it's like acoustic and vocal, but it sounds absolutely perfect, and it reminds you kind of like that old Laurel Canyon sound, of the Jackson Browne. Like it just felt like the natural evolution of what someone like Jackson Browne would turn into in my generation.
Right.
Like Taylor is in his like mid 30s, and it seems like he's like hit this like amazing groove in songwriting, like where the lyrics, grab you, and his musicianship, stands out.
For me, I wish more artists did sound like John Cougar Mellencamp.
Yeah,
I mean, I
there
kind of
wouldn't be-
miss all of that singer-songwriter rock, and I sure don't mind hearing Jackson Brown.
No,
so-
yeah, and I mean, it's American rock. It's Americana. Like
Yeah.
it's stuff
No,
that
it totally is it is American music.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, one of the reasons I was sharing all the stuff that Goldsmith has kind of done outside of Dawes is because he's really bringing all of these influences and experiences to the table
they
for
come
this
right
project.
back into
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
So, the first radio single off the album, I think really kind of showcases some of this 1980s American folk rock sound that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
It's a track called Who Do You Think You Were Talking To? It's currently at AAA and has peaked at number 9.
Who do you think you're talking to? Is it the man that was here before me? The one that wrecked your heart and walked? 'Cause if it isn't, I'll let you talk. It's clear that's something you're still working through. But who do you think you're talking to?
I think they have a couple more singles that they could go to when that track runs its course.
Yeah.
There's a song titled Free As We Wanna Be that I could see really being the next one released. It's a very strong song. It's got a great guitar hook, and probably the reason that Uncut, kind of pointed out the Mellencamp
The
comparison.
JCM connection. Yeah.
So, there is some truth to the fact that it feels more like a folk rock album from the 80s with all the influences we have mentioned, as
Yep.
well as some occasional Bruce Springsteen nods.
Yeah.
I think the piano on the album, which is one of my favorite changes, like it doesn't, in the past they've done keys and synth and things like that. I mean, this is just straight piano.
Yeah. Very. Yeah.
And the way that they're playing it and the tones and everything about it, like the way that they're playing the melodies on the piano, it reminds me of Billy Joel. It's like he's laying down the piano parts for some of this.
Yeah, it does have some like Billy Joel similarity to it. I definitely hear that.
So I think you can even hear this Joel influence on the vocal melody on the song Between the Zero and the One, which was one of my other favorite tracks on this.
One of my
So
favorites
when
as
you
well.
get the album, listen to that one. This album is just a great mixture of kind of like music legacy, okay?
Yep.
With
Singer,
solid
songwriter.
songwriting,
Yep.
solid songwriting, and outstanding production. Like it sounds so good.
Yep.
So I just think it's a great album. If you haven't listened to a lot of Dawes, this is definitely one worth checking out.
Yep.
Our members are going to be getting it in a limited edition 180 gram audiophile vinyl, in a
Yellow
limited yellow marble vinyl pressing. Yep. We also have the band's 2018, as we mentioned before, their release Passwords. Not 2008, 2018.
No,
It's a double translucent yellow vinyl.
Yes.
Both the podcast and the show on air on Lightning 100 are sponsored by World Vision. We are so proud to partner with them on COVID relief efforts. Aftershocks from the COVID pandemic include hunger, violence, and poverty, but hidden heroes are rising up, helping the most vulnerable to survive, recover, and build a better future. Look, all of you out there listening can be a hidden hero. Go to blindtigerrecordclub.com and click on the World Vision tab at the top of the page. Anything you can give will help. If you have the means, please donate today. If you do give, let your friends know that they can also impact COVID relief. Tell them you stepped up and they can too. Use hashtag Hidden Hero to share your encouragement. Be a hidden hero today. So on September 11th, Delta Spirit released the band's fifth studio album, What Is There, on New West Records.
New West.
Like the band Dawes, Delta Spirit also comes from California.
Yep.
It's been 6 years since their last album, 2014's Into the Wide.
And I think you could kind of not lump these bands, but they came from the same area same kind of like timeline and stuff. So like I've always kind of just identified Delta, Spirit, and Dawes kind of in that same vein of like, you know, indie rock bands.
And they both start with a D.
They D, you know, California. It's just too much.
Yeah.
There's too much connection.
Well, just to keep that connection going, you know, the front man is Matthew Vasquez, who
Yep.
we also mentioned in the Dawes segment
Yep.
because he was in Middle Brother with Taylor Goldsmith.
Correct.
Vasquez in Billboard, he said that, in a quote, a decade plus in close proximity can take a toll on any relationship, especially in the creative sphere.
Yep.
He
Which
went
you know,
on to-
like, in a
Yeah,
band,
for
we're
sure.
dealing with that.
Well, he went on to say that we hit pause and thankfully saved our friendship. Our lives needed to grow independently in order to return to a more collaborative place. We weren't sure if that was going to happen for us, but gratefully, after 2 years of working, we have an album that we feel extremely proud of. So they literally pushed stop in 2014 and said, we've got to take a break.
Like, otherwise, it was probably breakup time, you know,
Yeah.
like it was coming.
The band's first album, Ode to Sunshine, was released on the band's first label, Rounder Records, in 2007,
Yep.
and they pretty much toured extensively until this break. I mean,
Yes.
that's part of, I think, what contributed to this is they really were together all the time.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, this band has never, I mean, they had one member that's like changed, I think, since the creation of the band. Like, it's been the same guys the whole time.
Well, the band has a history at AAA radio. In 2012, they had the song California off the self-titled release from that same year that went to number 20. And 2 years later, they had a song called From Now On off the album Into the Wide. That one went number 23.
Yep.
Currently, that's also where the band's sitting right now, number 23 again, and could possibly be looking at their highest charting single depending on where that song peaks. The single is It Ain't Easy.
Could you feel me melting in your hand? The last time you saw me, I was blacked out in the van, disregarding every single red light that I saw. I blew past the speed trap, now I'm in trouble with the law. For the longest time, I would try to get in line, but it ain't easy, and I found it hard to be myself without your help, but it ain't easy.
So even though the band was on hiatus, Matt Vasquez stayed extremely busy.
Yeah.
He released 3 solo albums, 2017's Does What He Wants, 2018's Texas Murder Ballads, and 2019's Lighten Up. He also formed another supergroup, like Middle Brother. This time he did it in Texas, and it was called Glorietta. And that group consisted of Vasquez and Adrian Quesada of the Black Pumas.
Oh, very
we
nice,
talked
yeah.
about him when
Yeah.
we covered the Black Pumas a while
Yeah.
back. He also co-produced the album with Vasquez, so Quesada is really involved in this record.
That's very cool.
Then the two of them recruited singer-songwriters David Ramirez and Noah Gunderson,
Nice.
Wild Child's Kelsey Wilson and Jason Robert Bloom. There were also guest vocal appearances from Nathaniel Rateliff. I think the saxophonist was from Los Lobos.
Wow.
So, they just basically put a lot of their friends and connections that they all had in Texas, got together, had a really fun time, and made
I bet
this
it was.
album.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So even though Delta Spirit was kind of on hold
Yeah.
and no one was even really sure if they were going to reunite,
Yeah, all the members
they just
were doing
went,
their own
yeah.
things.
And he in particular, like he has just been pounding it out,
Writing songs.
yeah.
He reminds me kind of like the Taylor Goldsmith. Like, if we're talking about, the front man from Dawes, like, these guys can crank out songs, like,
right.
and it's like a lot of good material. Like, Matthew Vasquez has a penchant for writing a song that can be synced.
Yeah.
He's got this impeccable way of doing things. So, as far as a songwriter.
Well, also like Dawes, this band has been linked to kind of that modern Laurel Canyon music.
Yeah.
And the band has been
traditionally,
called
they sound a little bit traditionally like more like roots rock and Americana.
Right.
This record feels a little bit more like electronic, if you want to,
indie rock,
yeah,
Americana,
just more effects and stuff like that than what I feel like you normally hear with their music. But like, still definitely a Laurel Canyon like same vein as Dawes, really.
Yeah. And, I mean, the band's even been called emo arena rock, which you and I were talking about.
Yep.
Like, I'm not really sure how well that fits it. But,
yeah.
I mean, even on this album, I mean, it's definitely lyrically, it's kind of dark and moody.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the things that's interesting is, Vasquez keeps the album still feeling pretty light, even if the subject matter is not, because he constantly brings in this like vocal falsetto.
Yep.
They've got harmonies on a lot of the tracks, these
hooks.
singable choruses and hooks.
Yes.
Yeah, so it doesn't ever feel like it gets too much in this moody place for too long.
No, yeah, and I mean, if it's like the songs sound for the most part, like there are some like darker sounding songs, but like the pop element of the album is what's cool, because the lyrical content is very dark, on some of the songs. Like,
and I could hear that maybe being more emo than the music.
Exactly, especially like the lyrics for How About It, like about gambling addiction and like someone, coming to Las Vegas and like getting basically like assaulted basically on their introduction to the city or whatever. Like, I could see that from a lyrical standpoint, but musically it definitely sounds more like just straightforward, like indie rock,
Well, the band self-produced this album. And
there's multiple guys in this band that can engineer and produce.
There's no reason to bring in someone.
Yeah.
So
even though they do, like, if you look at the credits, like it's Kelly Winrich, who is one of the members of the band. He's like a multi-instrumentalist, can play everything, but he also is like kind of their main engineer, I think. But even Matthew Vasquez engineers on this album, but they have several assistants. So I think that they can get it all done in house,
Yep, they just get it sounding the way they want it, and then they make all the arrangement decisions, themselves. And
I'm sure that makes it so much easier to work on a record, like when it's said and done.
Well, another track that they released early to set up the album was a song called Pressure. This song actually opens up the album, and it's an up-tempo song with a sing-along chorus that will probably be like a concert staple once the band gets back to it.
Yeah.
So this is Pressure.
You got the fire, but you can't let it out. You're hiding in the basement. Rejected all your shit on somebody else. Well, soon you better face it. You practiced all your life, nobody can tell. You say you're fine as you lie to yourself, but you can't fight the feeling when it's coming around again. The pressure got its hooks in you. Can we talk to someone?
I think like just hearing songs like that, like as an album opener or whatever, you're immediately like hooked and ready to go listen to that band. Like when you have like that good of musicians at every position in the band, I feel like the songwriting definitely gets to be elevated or whatever. And like you can tell that this band is one of those ones that like they can write a song kind of with an idea of where it's going to end up, because like these guys have been synced on things like Friday Night Lights, Sons of Anarchy, Grey's Anatomy, American Dad, The Walking Dead. Like I feel like Matthew Vasquez specifically knows how to write a closing type sounding song, like for a show that's ending or whatever. Like Friday Night Lights, I think I was telling you earlier, like their song The Devil Knows You're Dead is used in the very final moments of the TV show Friday Night Lights, and it's just like this perfect wrap up. And like I'm like, how do you write a song knowing like this feels like it should be like used for this specific moment in a show? I mean, I'm sure they didn't do that, but it works perfectly.
Yeah. Well, and also a lot of that stuff translates really good live, and this is really another band that is used to presenting their new music to its fan base and with live events.
Yep.
So
releasing an album right now.
This release, like so many others, is really handcuffed by the COVID shutdown.
Yep.
The album really represents the best sides of Delta Spirit to me. There are these alternative up-tempo anthemic songs that we've been talking about, but there really are like those Laurel Canyon quieter moments on this album as well. And some critics I've seen, they kind of split the band's career into two parts, because they have that first part that seemed to be more in that Laurel Canyon vein.
Americana, roots, just rock.
And then they get to these bigger, slicker, more produced albums that are more, anthemic, for lack of a better word. And they almost look at them like they're two separate things are a progression or whatever.
Yeah. Well,
but
and
this
add
album's
6
got
years,
both.
Add 6 years in between a release, you know, like, or distance those two releases. Like their last release didn't come out, or it was in 2014, correct?
Right.
So, I mean, 6 years, you know, in between writing together could make a pretty big difference on what the sound could be.
Yeah. Well, I think this album is really a nice sweet spot for them. It's going to please both of those preferences. And
sure.
I think that the fans are going to really like it too.
Yeah, like the last half of the
definitely-
album, like the last 3 tracks, Lover's Heart, Just the Same, What Is There, that's where you kind of get that real
yep,
classic Delta Spirit sound.
Yep. Our members get to choose between 2 color variants this month.
Yep, got a cool little thing going.
They're both 180-gram audiophile vinyl, but we have one that is opaque yellow with black marble and one that is clear with black marble.
Both are beautiful, beautiful pressings.
Yeah, and this really is another one of those bands we mentioned to a lot of times on the show. They're really tough to get on vinyl.
Yeah.
Most of their albums are out of print, and so these will probably be limited. And especially in this variance, this is going to be very limited. We also have a very, very limited number of the side project we mentioned, Glorietta. So head to blindtigerrecordclub.com, and if you're not a member, you sign up and pick Rock and Alternative, and you'll get Delta Spirit.
Hey, pretty moon, so bright and fair.
On September 25th, the Warren Treaty released the husband and wife duo's second album, Hartstown, on Rounder Records. The group is made up of Tanya Blount Trotter and Michael Trotter Jr. The duo released their first album, Healing Tide, in 2017. It was produced by Buddy Miller, and I think it's safe to say it kind of took the Americana world by storm.
Yeah, they came out of nowhere like a bat out of you-know-what.
Yeah. I mean, it peaked at number 11 on Billboard's Heatseeker albums. It was number 18 on Americana folk albums. Critics just adored the couple.
Pretty incredible producer to work with on your first full-length album. Buddy Miller has a
just
huge
legendary
history in Americana, so he and his wife both,
So, I mean, right out of the gate, I just think it felt different. It even felt different for like a Buddy Miller record. So it just got a lot of people paying attention really quick.
Yep.
People compared it to everything from Delaney and Bonnie and many other classic soul artists to even Ike and Tina Turner.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
duos,
comparisons
for
to
sure.
for other duos, but definitely in that soul vein.
Yep.
But yet the album, it wasn't like a Stax record.
No.
It was like an Americana record, really.
Yeah, very much so.
This album would lead at the end of that year to an Americana Honors and Award nomination for Duo Group of the Year.
Yep.
And they ended up winning Emerging Act of the Year.
Yes.
This all kind of culminated to a performance earlier this year at the Grammys, where they basically performed with just a whole bunch of stars in one of those medleys that they do.
Oh, yeah.
But for an act that nobody even heard of a year and a half earlier, it was pretty amazing to see them.
A very quick ascension to the top.
Well, the Trotters live here in Nashville, and they've played with groups like Mumford & Sons, Brandy Carlisle, Al Green, Elvis Costello.
All over the spectrum of artists.
Emmylou Harris was a featured artist on the Healing Tide. I mean, they've really been embraced by people in both Americana and soul circles.
Yep.
But a lot of really legitimate musicians really just must like these to even just as people, because they want them to come to their shows. And
I'm sure I think you gravitate to those voices and those harmonies, out of the music, but I think the people themselves, Michael and Tanya, are probably two of the most amazing people,
Yeah. Well, the first single is a song called 5 More Minutes. And it's a song with a pretty amazing story behind it. Michael Trotter is a veteran, and he served 2 tours in Iraq. In 2017, he was really struggling with PTSD, and he just got it in his head that his family would be better off without him. Thought, his life insurance policy would fix all their financial woes, both with his wife and his son.
Yeah.
And there's this time, I guess, when Tanya knew what he was up to.
That it was coming, or
yeah,
that he
so
was
she
feeling
called the
very,
police and tried to persuade him to hold on. And she told Rolling Stone that she just grabbed him and said, "Give me 5 more minutes to love you." And Michael looked at his wife with tears in his eyes and just said, "Okay."
Yeah.
And you know, Trotter has since received therapy for PTSD, but that traumatic experience of that time period became the chorus of this really upbeat and hopeful song.
Yeah, beautiful sounding song with just a story behind it, man.
Yeah, it's currently at AAA radio at number 22, and honestly, I hope it really continues to climb. This is 5 more minutes.
Leaving so soon is like we just arrived. Did I play the right tune for your pleasure tonight? Stay with me, don't leave just yet. We got all night, so please forget about tomorrow. 5 more minutes, I need 5 more minutes to love.
So that is an amazing song with amazing like vocal harmonies, and you can see an incredible version of that performed on the Ryman stage that they just did like last. I think it's very recent. I don't know, it's in the last 30 days or so. But if there's one stage where you can respect and love the vocals, you know, it's the Ryman stage, and these two people are, you know, that's who you want to hear on the stage.
Well, an American singer-songwriter Hal Horowitz said about the Warren Treaty, affirming the essence of all things positive, healing and loving has seldom felt so good. And I think it just says a lot, because he was talking about that on their first album, but they just have kind of like taking traumatic events and showing healing has become almost like a theme for the couples in their music.
And that there's life after the pain, you know, things like that.
Well, the Trotters self-produced this new album at Blackbird Studios in Nashville. Michael was really kind of at the helm of that. Buddy Miller had encouraged him to, you know, along with his wife, to take the reins and kind of produce this one themselves. You know, it's really hard to pin this duo down to a genre.
Yeah, when especially like when every track on the album kind of has its own niche and like place.
Yeah,
I mean, it still feels cohesive. Do not get me wrong, but these songs, like each one could live on a different playlist on Spotify.
For sure.
Like
I mean,
different genre
they even have
playlists.
country influence songs mixed in there
Absolutely.
with soul and roots. You know, they cite the Civil Wars as a group that really helped them kind of narrow down, not necessarily maybe their sound, but like
more of
the
the way that
niche
they
and
operate.
where they wanted to go, kind of where they, you know, like almost like basing themselves as an Americana thing.
Yeah.
You know, before the shutdown, the Warren Treaty were really in serious demand for live performances. I mean, they were playing festivals like Bonnaroo, Newport, Telluride.
Blowing up.
Yeah, just big time demand. I think that's going to pick right back up when
That's
everything
going to be
gets
their
cranking.
bread and butter.
You know, as
The
we
live
mentioned, you know, they had Emmylou Harris on the first album, but on this record, they had another iconic artist make an appearance. Jason Isbell is featured on the track Beautiful. This song, once again, just shows the diverse range of this album.
I didn't see the future, but it came in so clear. You were calling, I came running dear. We were walking through the valley where the fall was your breath, and you breathed it out loud. I knew you had nothing left. When I looked you in your face, from your eyes fell a tear. Then you went away, left us standing there. We're not even done. But what we are is beautiful. Oh, you are so beautiful. Bright and morning star, you are so. I've never seen such a pretty thing. You're so beautiful to me. And I never seen such a pretty thing. Oh, you
So Tanya told American Songwriter that they really wanted to evolve on this record. She said they wanted to take everything that they loved, rock, gospel, soul, blues, and figure out how to make it all mesh. That's the beautiful thing about Americana, she said. It's a combination of all of those elements, and it allowed us to explore any kind of sound we wanted.
And that statement is like 120% truthful.
Yep.
Like that's the gospel right there.
Well, I think it's just safe to say this album's not like anything else you'll probably hear this year.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the range from track 1 to, track 12 going like, and I mean, not to mention the fact that this album on track 11, Hustlin', features Jerry Douglas, famed musician, and Chris Eldridge from the Punch Brothers.
Right.
There's so much for the average music fan to listen to. Like, if you like vocals, then you got vocals. If you like harmonies, you got harmonies. If you want this genre, that genre, you're gonna find something in one of these songs. And
that's a great point about like Chris Eldridge. Like, they've written I think more than one song on this record with him.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's just a lot of influences pouring in here. They do it very tastefully, and you and I were even talking about off the mic. Like, this really is a true duo. I mean, a lot of like back and forth with the vocal,
the call
like
and response,
yeah,
which is one of your favorite things when you pay attention to music and stuff. Like, you want that. It creates the emotion and the fire in the music, and that's one thing with this group I feel like comes to the head more than anything is like, you feel their passion in the songs. And like, for those of you out there who are wondering if you had maybe heard Tanya Blount-Trotter's voice before, you weren't alone, because I thought she sounded familiar when I first listened to this record, and I went and looked it up. She actually sang with Lauryn Hill for a duet on His Eye Is on the Sparrow from the 1993 film Sister Act 2, which I grew up watching, with my older sister and my mom. So,
which is before anyone even knew who Lauryn Hill was.
Yeah, that was Lauryn Hill's breakout, like from the performances on that movie.
And I so remember that song. Like, that song was, I used to tell people, oh, have you heard the version from Sister Act 2 of His Eyes on the Sparrow? It's unbelievable. But that was, Lauryn Hill hadn't broke yet, and of course you had no idea that Tanya was going to
standing right there performing that duet with her right there at the piano. That's like, it takes me back to those days when I was a kid, when like music would give me chills. It doesn't happen as much in my 30s now, but voices like Lauryn Hill's and Tanya Trotter's, I felt the emotion when I was like 10 years old listening to these songs.
Yeah. So we have this for our members in a standard vinyl, but the Trotters were gracious enough to autograph all the club's copies. It's hard to find the first album. This is another one. So you want to grab this copy before they're gone, especially while we've got the signed ones.
Autographed copies.
So yeah, that's the Jazz, Soul, and Blues Record of the Month for October.
Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither wildly as they slip away across the universe. Pools of sorrow, waves of joy are drifting through my open mind, possessing and caressing me.
On March 7th, 1975, David Bowie released his 9th studio album, Young Americans, on RCA Records. Like many of Bowie's albums, this is a really important album in just the story of rock music.
Absolutely. This is a pretty pivotal, time for David Bowie.
Mm-hmm. In particular, it marks a stylistic shift for really one of music's biggest icons, but this is when Bowie shifted from glam rock to rock that was infused with soul, gospel, R&B, and even disco.
Yeah, from T-Rex to Teddy Pendergrass.
Yeah, and this is kind of a lane he'll stay in for the better part of the next decade.
Well, the people that he connects with through this time are people that stay with him for the next 10, 15 years. So,
well, the album peaked at number 9 on Billboard 200. It was number 2 on the UK's OCC, and it charted in international markets really everywhere. Several top 10 markets around the world. Yeah. It was even number 20 on the end of year chart on the Billboard 200, so it had some staying power as well.
Yeah.
The first single released off the album was the title track, Young Americans. This was his first breakthrough really in the U.S.
Which is surprising.
It wasn't his first single to chart, but it reached number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was number 25 on Rock and Alternative. It was number 20 at Cashbox, and it was number 18 in the UK on their singles chart. So, you know, it is a song that's on the Rolling Stones Greatest Songs of All Time list, the 500 Greatest Songs of All Time list. So, you know, it's had some long-term impact as well as a song. But this is Young Americans.
They pulled in just behind the bridge. He lays her down. He frowns. Gee, my life's a funny thing. Am I still too young? He kissed her then and there. She took his ring, took his babies. It took him minutes, took her nowhere. Heaven knows he'd have taken anything. All night. She wants a young American. The young American standing right through the picture windows.
Young Americans, the song is actually a hybrid of you know, soul music from back in the day, and then Bowie was also like getting obsessed with Bruce Springsteen because he was up and coming in New Jersey in the songwriter scene at that time, and I read that Bowie was basically kind of trying to do that whole storyteller thing that Bowie does in his songs, where there's a story of a guy and a girl, and you don't necessarily know their names, you know, but you go through the story kind of in these pockets of image or memories or whatever, and it leads down the road of whatever the culmination of the story is.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Yeah, because there were so many artists in the early '70s that were just enamored with very young Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, which I feel like storytelling in song wasn't a new thing, but he was doing it in a way that everyone really liked. Very
authentically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, this album was recorded in two parts. First, it was at Sigma Sound Studios in Philadelphia. You know, kind of really one of the first kind of grabbing of the Philly soul sound into mainstream pop and rock music.
Yeah, this was Sigma Sound was a really famous studio. The two owners, Kenneth Gamble and Leon Huff, they produced the OJs, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, you know, Lou Rawls, Teddy Pendergrass, like I mentioned earlier. Just a lot. That sound was basically, you know, created there.
And David Bowie intentionally was seeking out the people and that were attached to soul and R&B and places. And he was working with producer Tony Visconti. And Visconti, you know, he first worked with Bowie on his self-titled second album in 1969. Worked on multiple albums with him, would go on to work with Bowie throughout his entire career, even producing his final album, Black Star, in 2016. Before Bowie, Visconti had produced most of T-Rex's albums, you know, which goes to your point of even kind of some of that stuff that's getting brought in here. In the sound. Well, you know, in Young Americans, while recording in Philly, Bowie had also just met guitar player Carlos Alomar, and he actually met him at the Apollo. And they had become friends, and you know, Alomar had played with James Brown, Chuck Berry, Wilson Pickett, and he really became Bowie's mentor into this world of, you know, black music, soul music, all the stuff that was going on at the time that was kind of counter, especially a lot of artists coming from the UK. They were really looking for that sound to merge with what they were doing, you know, across the pond, and I mean, he ended up working and collaborating with Bowie for the next 14 years.
Yeah, Alomar was also pretty instrumental in Bowie, on this album specifically. You know, his best friend was someone that we'll talk about, you know, that provide a lot of the background vocals and you know, arrangements and stuff.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, because it's really about the studio band and the players they picked. For the studio band for this album, Bowie brought in some of the players he had just toured with on the Diamond Dogs tour. That included Mike Garson on piano. There was David Sanborn on sax, you know, who ended up becoming a a jazz kind of legend, I guess, really broke in late 80s, early 90s. But
that solo at the beginning of Young Americans is enough, you know? He sold it.
Then Pablo Ricera on percussion, which is another name you will see through the years on a lot of records. Then at Alomar's suggestion, he brought in Andy Newmark from Sly and the Family Stone on drums. He also brought in Willie Meeks of the Isley Brothers on bass. And then he brought in, as you were mentioning, his friend Luther Vandross. And
just an unknown friend of his that had an amazing voice.
Well, and he not only performs BGVs on a couple of songs, but he also co-wrote the song Fascination, which ironically is a song that Bowie has never performed live.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was just because it wasn't the same without Vandross, but that's someone that Alomar brought in. The second location where they recorded the rest of this album, or locations, it was 2 studios in New York City. It was Electric Lady Studios and then the record plant. And while he was there, they brought in a producer-engineer, Harry Maslin, to work with them some as well. And he has worked with Dionne Warwick, Bonnie Raitt, and James Taylor, just to name a few. I think Barry Manilow, just a long list of people he'd been working with before he worked with Bowie.
Yeah.
During this time, Bowie collaborated with John Lennon while he was in New York. And not only did they perform the Beatles cover that we played at the beginning of this segment, Across the Universe, and John Lennon, did background vocals on that and helped with the arrangement, but he also then co-wrote and performed on the biggest single on this album. Fame was written by Bowie, Lennon, and Alomar. So that song went number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was Bowie's first number 1 single. It was number 14 on Hot Rock and Alternative. It was number 21 on R&B, number 17 in the UK. It was even number 7 on the Hot 100 at the end of year list. So again, it just it was getting a lot of spins that whole year.
Absolutely.
The song is one of 4 Bowie songs on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 Songs That Shaped Rock and Roll. So this is a staple of David Bowie and his career. This is Fame. Young Americans is one of Bowie's most influential albums. It really released at the beginning of the whole disco movement. And not only would it shift him from glam rock to whatever you want to call it, soul rock, plastic soul. Yeah, any of that.
He described it as. Yeah.
Which is almost like a slam on his own thing.
He was. He was being very self-deprecating when he made that comment. He was saying that it was the squashed remains of ethnic music as it survives in the age of music.
I think it was his way of acknowledging of like, look, I'm definitely,
I'm not
Alomar is helping me,
yeah,
piece this together, but I'm definitely borrowing from another style. And so, as things went into disco and we kind of saw things changing through the 70s, like there were a lot of other artists that would really follow this trend over the next half decade of bringing in R&B and mixing it really heavy with rock and having some of that disco flair without going full-blown disco.
That's what I was going to say,
really like kind of funk and, a lot of this other stuff that gets kind of weaved in. This is also the album that really established him here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Which
still, like I said, it surprises me. Like, he had Ziggy Stardust at this point, and yet that wasn't the thing. It was this.
I think those things got more popular as time went on, and they were probably popular with real, people that were really into music and were listening already to The Who and things like that, and they were already listening to stuff coming from the UK, and they were reading, editorial periodicals of the time that were telling you albums to get. But this album took them to radio, to mainstream America, and would honestly define the better part of the rest of his career. It's really a must-own. Even if you just look at the legendary collaboration with Lennon and Bowie.
Yeah.
But there's really just so much more here. I mean, this is the start of Bowie and Alamar's relationship.
It's the beginning of Luther Vandross's career, independent. With Bowie on this record, but that's what launched Luther Vandross's extremely successful, R&B career.
Well, and like I said, I mean, this album defines Bowie really for the next decade.
It does.
Our members are going to be getting this in a limited edition gold vinyl pressing, and I really do think this is a must-own for any vinyl collector. Well, that is all the October records of the month for the Blind Tiger Record Club. If you want to find out more about any of these albums, head to blindtigerrecordclub.com and go to the homepage, and you can read more about any and all of the records that we talked about on this show. You can also learn how to become a member, and you can actually pick one of these albums to start your membership. After that, you get vinyl like that delivered to your door every month. We also have international memberships available, so you can join from almost anywhere in the world. It is October, and every year we celebrate rock music for the entire month with our Rocktober sale. So click on the Rocktober link at the website and see what albums that we have marked down this year. It's a great time to expand your rock and alternative catalog. Please remember our sponsor, World Vision. If you go to blindtigerrecordclub.com/World Vision and donate $20 or more to World Vision, email the receipt to vinyl@blindtigerrecordclub.com, and we will send you a $10 gift card that you can use for anything in the store. Don't forget to check out our interview with Thad Cockrell. It's available on all podcast platforms, or you can just stream it straight from blindtigerrecordclub.com. Just click on the podcast button. Please follow the podcast, like us, leave reviews and comments, tell your friends about the show, email Lightning100. You can stay up to date on all that we're doing by signing up for our email list at the website. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And most importantly, please keep coming back. We want to thank Finnegan Bell for the use of their song For a Dying Man as our show's theme song, and thank you to Lightning 100 for always supporting local art and events and even shows like ours. Until next time, keep the wax spinning.
For a dying man, I feel pretty good.